as I was talking with Paul and Lillian Wong, and he said, "At last we get a chance to meet." And I thought, who is he? But he wasn't talking to me, he was talking to Paul. Shook his hand, introduced himself, and I said, I have to say the same thing. At last we get a chance to meet. But I'm not sure you're the man that I was wanting to meet. So he's assured me that he is. What we don't know about Todd is that he says that he would make a perfect Gordon Gekko, that he actually worked on Wall Street. His grandmother was one of the first women to work on Wall Street. And there's more about his life that I'll let him share with you himself if he so chooses. But he has twins. He is himself a twin. So he has 3-year-old twin daughters. And he has done a great deal, a boatload of research on meaning, spirituality, and the human condition. And without further ado, Todd Kashdan.
Would you be disappointed if instead of me talking about my autobiography, I actually talked about some science? Would that sound okay? All right. I always felt that it's and by the way, let me just say, where's Paul here, who I just met yesterday for the first time ever in person? Is Paul here? Then you're just not gonna get my gratitude then. Okay. I always felt that it's 45 minutes to listen to a single person is far too much. So it's only in the past month that I've decided to stop giving singular talks on one topic and creating 3 for the price of 1. So this is where you get the title for 3 issues on the meaningful life, where I'm going to be talking about 3 separate research programs that my lab is conducting. There'll be some important sort of synergy across them, but this way you don't get bored, I don't get bored, and we can enjoy ourselves this morning. And one of the things that is of fundamental importance to me is realizing that there are real permeable boundaries between a lot of the different areas of the people in this room and the people in our field. We talk about clinical psychology, social psychology, counseling psychology, being a practitioner, being an allied health professional, a crisis worker, social worker. And what I'd like to do is bridge across those boundaries and try to tap into some of the wisdom within those disciplines and put them together into an intellectual smoothie. So one of the problems in our discipline is we have this idea that the tools that we use to study people's personality, their well-being, meaning in life, that they accurately represent the people that we're actually trying to understand and help. We have these very static, fixed approaches to focusing on personality. We give someone a questionnaire, the big 5 personality traits, and we have this idea that this is capturing what personality is. Or we give someone a questionnaire about meaning in life, and we figure this captures the degree to which someone has meaning in their lives right now. And one of the things is this kind of approach of giving someone a questionnaire one time, 3 months later, another arbitrary 3 months later, we've got our arbitrary 1-year follow-up because everybody likes even numbers, is that this doesn't necessarily capture personality. This is how we operationalize personality and well-being. And so one of the approaches that I take is to actually study people in the context of their everyday lives. Their naturally selected environments, a study of what actually happens in the context of how they organize their lives and how they react to events, not to which we expose them to in an artificial laboratory experiment, but in the context of who they approach, what they do, and who are the people in their lives. So if you look at the literature, one of the things we like to have is we have these steel cage death matches between constructs. And if you tend to be as the type of person that likes mixed martial arts, you've got them in the octagon together, which is that mindfulness is better than suppression, and that cognitive reappraisal is questionable because the mindfulness people are saying, well, if you're going to try to challenge your thoughts, you're not accepting your thoughts, so that's not as good as mindfulness either. And that the distraction might not be as good as social support. And so we challenge all of these ideas by pitting them against each other. The idea that if I study social support for 5 or 10 years, there's a lot of great research out there that everything else doesn't exist. In a vacuum, I can study how does social support improve life longevity, improve your ability to respond to a life-debilitating illness or an injury or disease. And so instead of comparing all these different mechanisms, maybe we can start to think about What's a more dynamic approach that captures the messiness of human beings? And what you find is there's some good research out there, but it's buried. So George Bonanno in New York City has been studying how people have been responding after 9/11. And what he found was that when you look at people over the course of 6 months, people that tend to reappraise their thoughts and their emotions do better than people that try to conceal and hide their feelings. It's not a new finding. It's only new because we're studying people after a very specific traumatic event or a major life stressor. But what's interesting is he thought to himself, well, what about people that when you're given instructions to conceal your emotions, you're really good at it? And you're given instructions to, I want you to think about a different way of looking at this. You're really good at that. That the people that are good at whatever the situation demands might be better off in the long term than anyone that's particularly good at a particular strategy. What I would call psychological flexibility. And it's exactly what he found, is that those people, when given instructions to conceal their emotions, are good at it. Reappraise their emotions, are good at it. They do better than anybody else in terms of their social functioning and their distress 6 months after 9/11. So if we think about things more dynamically, we can start to understand the complexity of humans. And this is what I want to talk about, is moving to these complex ways to studying complex people. And we can think about psychological flexibility in at least 2 ways, because I don't want to go through the entire paper that I wrote. One is that the ability to adapt to changing situational demands. What this means is being extroverted is not better than being introverted. It depends on the situational context that you're in. If it ends up being a one-on-one conversation with someone in a power position who has something that you need, a little bit of introversion is probably going to be better than extroversion, where you're actually listening and compiling and contemplating information than trying to get social attention and the rewards out of a situation. So we have to be able to adapt to changing situations. What this means is you can't study people or look at people at one single point in time. You have to look at them repeatedly in multiple social situations. Another way of thinking about psychological flexibility is, how can I achieve movement in the direction of things that I care about despite pain, despite self-doubt? This is something I'll be talking about in the third portion of the talk today. To be able to make movement towards the things we care about despite pain. So I'm going to be talking about 3 lines of research. Positive psychology is obsessed with the notion of happiness, which is why it's so cool and so weird to be at this conference around all these meaning people, because you people are the orphan one-legged stepchild in the positive psychology field, where everyone feels that the ultimate objective of life is to be happy. And by talking about happiness, because the Dalai Lama said that, we're subsuming meaning under happiness. That umbrella captures everything. Now, this isn't news to you guys, which is the idea that this is potentially very problematic when we're so imprecise about our terminology to say that happiness not only is equal to meaning in life, but absorbs it like the blob, so that we no longer need to talk about or study meaning directly. The other one is about making meaning out of emotions. So you have this other work in the field of affective science and positive psychology, which suggests that positive emotions are very adaptive. This broaden and build motion. We can think we can absorb more in terms of our attentional field. We can extract more information. We can think more flexibly, and then over time, it actually builds resources. If we're a positive person, we build more positive social relationships. We end up being a more creative person, more productive. The list goes on and on. It's a very passive approach to emotions. If I have positive emotions, they will broaden me, and I will build things from it. And what I would like to think about is, well, we are not the passive recipients of emotions. We relate to our emotions. We have attitudes about our emotions. We think about our emotions. We regulate our emotions. So talking about positive emotions outside of the context of what we do with them and how we relate to them is weird. It doesn't fit with what happens in the real world. And the final thing I want to talk about is some really cool unpublished data just out of my laboratory about the notion of maybe there's an alternative to happiness as being the ultimate objective in life. And that is, if we want to have sustainable well-being, the architecture of a well-lived life, happiness is not the action. It's actually purpose in life. And so I want to present some of the first real hardcore data about this in the context of a population of people with anxiety disorders as well. So 3 programs of research. If 2 of the 3 bore you, at least hopefully one of them will excite you. So let's talk about this paradox of searching for happiness. Studies that have shown asking questions to tens of thousands of people around the world, what is the fundamental objective of your life? So we're not talking about a goal here. We're not talking about what do you want to do in the next few weeks. The fundamental objective of why you're alive, what your life is about. 85 to 95% of people will say it's to be happy is their answer. And it's blasphemy for me to stand up here and say there might be a potential problem with that in terms of happiness being your objective of life. But focus on that. We're talking about the objective of your life. And what I'm going to argue is that potentially trying to control our thoughts and feelings to try to be happier is actually potentially the problem. Especially if you look at it not on day to day, but how you organize who you are as a person and what you're going to do with your life. What are you going to try to accomplish with your limited amount of time on this planet? You know, the ultimate currency that we have as human beings is our time and our energy. And we could spend this in all sorts of different ways. And maybe there's a way to spend it more wisely than focusing on trying to be happy as our primary objective in life. So a lot of this isn't new, but I want to take it into a few interesting, nuanced ways. If we're going to talk about striving to be happy, it doesn't matter what your definition is. We could focus on Diener's definition. Life satisfaction, high frequency of positive emotions, low frequency of negative emotions. We can dip into the pool of self-determination theory and say it's believing that you're satisfying the need to feel a sense of belonging, competence, sense of mastery. Really, in some sense, you're still talking about cognitive appraisals about who you are in your life. It's just a different level of analysis. Diener's talking about satisfaction with your life overall. Self-determination theorists are talking about particular domains in your life. Competence, a sense of belonging. Either way, what you're talking about is trying to find the perfect mix of thoughts and feelings, some better than others. So if I feel this real sense of shame, this real sense of guilt, sense of righteous indignation because of what's happened with BP, what's happening with the government, if I move in that direction, I am moving away from this aim of trying to be happier. And so if your aim in life is to be happier, you move away from that and move towards something else. You're always looking for this perfect balance. You're checking this barometer constantly. It's like having this crackberry that you're checking incessantly, your email, while you're at dinner with your kids and your family, looking at what's the barometer? Am I moving towards being happier, or is this pulling me away? None of us likes to put our kids in timeout. None of us likes to tell our kids that we don't like the way that they're doing in school. We don't like the way they're behaving towards other children. But if one of your objectives in life is to be a good caregiver and instill healthy social values in your child, one of the goals is going to be correcting behavior that prevents them from being part of a benevolent, compassionate world. In the short term, that's a lot of negative experiences. Seeing your kids distressed by the fact that you have to punish them. If your objective is to be happy, your fundamental objective of life, all that stuff gets in the way of that objective. So in any situation, the idea of trying to regulate our emotions and thoughts, it's a good thing. We're trying to sort of the possibility of getting rid of unwanted things in a particular moment. I'm not really talking about in the moment, because in the moment, depending on the situation, almost any behavior can be healthy or unhealthy. It depends. The consequences of consistently trying to seek this perfect mix of thoughts and feelings to be happier, we have these rebound effects. Nothing new to you. This is the pink bear stuff. pink elephant, whatever it is. Something pink. Pink plus animal. Is that the more that you think about these things, the more you try not to think about them, you think about them more, you have this rebound effect. You try not to feel guilty, you're going to feel more guilty. When you're at work, you're wishing that you were at home. When you're at home, you're wishing you were at work. I don't spend enough time with my kids. I don't have sex enough with my spouse. I'm not working hard enough. I can go online and find 50 people that are more productive than me, that are younger than me. So I feel guilty about everything that I do. And I try to avoid this, and then it makes me look at more websites to find more people that show how much I procrastinate about myself. There's a rebound effect. But more interesting to me is that when we have this internal battle to try and have particular thoughts and feelings, we're not paying attention to what's happening in the moment. We're not present. We're not mindful. We lose moments. We're losing the currency of what life is about. It steals time and effort from doing things in line with meaningful strivings, value-based living. That's what self-regulation is in terms of when it's focused on trying to be happy. You're talking about an internal battle that's stealing time and away from meaningful endeavors. So this is what I wanted to study in Vietnam War veterans, because I figure they're getting older, nobody's studying them anymore, but they're in an interesting situation because of the fact of you have these people that went from this intensive train to be warriors back to civilian life, ridiculously difficult homecoming in terms of trying to return to civilian life and enter the everyday routines of taking out the garbage on Tuesday, recycling on Thursdays, making sure that I call your parents and your cousins and your grandkids. This is a tough thing to do from the high sensation-seeking thrills of being in the midst of war. So now it's decades later. What are their lives organized around? What's it about? So one thought was that we would see these self-regulatory issues appear in their idiographic or their personally identified strivings. What are they trying to accomplish with their lives? What are their lives organized around? And we were just having this conversation at breakfast this morning about qualitative and quantitative data. This is qualitative data. We didn't give them a bunch of questions. On a scale of 1 to 7, how important is parenting to the way that you organize your life? If you're a parent, you know you're going to score above your number above a 4. You would feel so guilty to put a 1, 2, or 3. It's almost inherently assured that you will be a 5 or above. So we don't ask them that. We ask them, here are some blank lines. I want you to list, personally identify what's your life about, and then we go back and we code those things. So we're quantifying some qualitative data. What we thought was that the content of these strivings are going to account for the fact that even if a veteran has post-traumatic stress disorder, they're not all going to show the same level of well-being and functioning in their daily lives. Even though the DSM tells us, by definition, if you have a disorder, you have significant distress or impairment. But the DSM is not accounting for well-being, which is that how much is it compromised, and what can we study in their lives that helps us to understand who's able to function despite the presence of lingering traumatic memories and intrusive thoughts and anxious symptoms, and still able to function and make progress, make effort towards the things they most care about in life. Maybe PTSD doesn't give us the whole story. Maybe it's masking this real heterogeneity in combat veterans that are returning into civilian life. So it's 47 Vietnam War veterans, 21 of them had post-traumatic stress disorder. This is a really comprehensive study with social workers, psychiatrists, and psychologists. I'm not going to go into explicit details on methods, but if you are a stat geek or a method geek, I love this stuff. I live for this. Feel free to ask me questions. But we even got their DD-214 records from the government, which says that there's concrete evidence that they actually received combat exposure when they were out there. So this is not about a self-report questionnaire about, did you go to war? What were your symptoms like? This is a triage with a number of different methods there. We gave them a well-being scale. One of the better ones that's out there, for some reason, nobody does this because I don't think there are any authors from University of Pennsylvania. But this is a really great measure of well-being. For 2 weeks, we had them record their daily self-esteem. Now, this is pretty important because most people that use studies of what happens in daily life did not study older adults. So for a daily basis, in terms of self-esteem, it's a pretty good marker because of the fact of self-esteem is somewhat, to some degree, an indicator of the degree to which we feel that we are valued as a person, our self-esteem. So this is that the need for belonging is built into our self-esteem on a daily basis. And what we also did is we asked them about their personal strivings. And as I mentioned, this is a very idiographic, open-ended, qualitative approach. And then after they put down their specific things that what their life is about, then they were asked questions about them. How much progress are you making towards them? How much effort, how much meaning are you deriving from your strivings? And then we had objective people code them in terms of themes. Are they approach-oriented, for such as, I'm trying to be a better lover? So that would be approach-oriented. Or it could be, I'm trying not to focus on my anxiety in the bedroom, which would be an avoidance striving. Is it focused on emotion regulation and happiness? I'm trying to be a calmer person? Or is it focused on something else? I'm trying to leave a legacy for what I do at work. So we had them code. We had a manual for coding these things. And what you can see here, the inter-rater reliability is it's huge in terms of being able to, two separate people independently rating these strivings were able to tell you whether it's approach or avoidance, it's focused on happiness and regulating emotions, or something else. Now, there's a lot of work on approach and avoidance in the literature, so we wanted to see is this idea of emotion regulation strivings or not, is it the same thing as approach and avoidance? And what you can see here is it's almost perfectly balanced in terms of some of these emotion regulation strivings are about trying to avoid emotions. I don't want to feel guilty. I don't want to feel anxious. And a lot of them are approach-oriented. I want to feel calmer. I want to feel happier. I want to feel a sense of serenity. So it's not identical to approach and avoidance. Now, interestingly, the literature on trauma survivors with post-traumatic stress disorder focuses on avoidance. But there's actually no difference in their strivings in terms of avoidance. The difference is the degree to which they focus on regulating their emotions. Twice as many in veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder versus without disorder. But that's not the interesting stuff. That's just the boring setup. Now, what we wanted to see was, is there synergy such that veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder or without it, if most of their strivings in their lives are focused on trying to be happy, does it actually interfere with being happy? Because they're spending all this time thinking about it, trying to regulate, that they're not actually living. This is exactly what we find. Well, actually, first, let me take a step back for a second. Who knows what's going to come up on these PowerPoint slides? So what you find is that for veterans with PTSD, that's a nice, strong light. In terms of the effort devoted towards strivings, veterans with PTSD are devoting more effort towards the strivings focused on trying to be happy and regulating emotions, where you find the exact opposite for veterans without PTSD, that their efforts are mostly devoted to things other than regulating emotions. So you're seeing a complete flip depending on whether they're suffering from an anxiety disorder. You can get these slides. No reason to take a picture of my PowerPoint. That's just silly. So now what's most interesting is the effort of focusing on devoting this substantial time and effort to trying to regulate emotions, being happy, fails to translate into well-being. Look at the difference in well-being. Now, remember, all these veterans have diagnoses, clinical diagnoses from psychiatrists and psychologists for post-traumatic stress disorder. They're receiving disability payments from the government for their PTSD. Look at the difference in well-being. That veterans whose their abundant strivings are focused on something other than trying to be happy or regulating emotions are showing well-being that's the same as veterans without PTSD. But veterans with PTSD who their lives are organized around trying to be happy are showing this major deficiency in well-being. And you find the same effect actually for veterans without PTSD, that the greater abundance of strivings, the greater the degree that your life is organized about trying to be happier, does not translate into actually being happier. And in terms of daily self-esteem, every single day, there's a 30% drop in self-esteem on every single day on average for veterans with PTSD that most of their lives are focused on trying to be happy and regulating their emotions. What this is saying is that we can't just treat the disorder because that wouldn't tell us whether you end up in this column or this column. We have to focus on what's your life about? What are you organizing your life about? What are you trying to accomplish? What are going to be the aims for your existence? We don't address that, and they randomly fall into one of these two columns. Either high self-esteem or low self-esteem on a daily basis. And this numbers, you say to yourself, please, we're talking about between 10 and 15. What's the big deal? You're talking about, again, a 33% difference in self-esteem every single day on average. We translate that into, you're talking about real-world consequences here. So, to conclude, the way what our lives are organized around matters in terms of trauma survivors with PTSD. This is not some tangential thing, meaning in life, that we can add as an adjunct. And maybe if we deal with the post-traumatic stress disorder, their anxiety, their depression, their conflicts with their spouses, after we deal with all that, we can focus on meaning. This is saying we need to deal with these things directly right away. These are fundamental facets of trying to have someone functioning in society. There's a toxic combination of having post-traumatic stress disorder and an abundance of strivings to trying to be happier and regulating emotions. And we've already replicated these findings in another sample in the community of people with social anxiety disorder. So this isn't just a single study where we found this. But that's boring to report replication, so let's ignore that for now. In fact, let's ignore that whole section and go to our second portion of this that has nothing to do with the first section. So what I want to focus on is the idea of how we derive meaning out of our emotional experiences is of fundamental importance to understanding how we cope with negative emotions. I'll say this in a bunch of different ways over the next few minutes so that sinks in. But basically, I went to a talk when I was a grad student, and it was by Zindel Siegel. I don't know how many of you are familiar with him. He's a big mindfulness researcher. And at the end of his talk, he was saying that, in terms of when we focus on cognitive therapy techniques or cognitive behavioral therapy techniques, it's always been about we're going to change the content of people's thoughts and feelings to feel less negative, more positive. Less negative thoughts, more positive thoughts. And positive psychology is actually very similar right now. The zeitgeist right now is mindfulness is kind of on the side, and most of the things is about changing your particular thoughts and feelings. And so what Zindel said was that mindfulness isn't about changing the content of our consciousness. It's about changing how we relate to the particular pieces, the information, the meaning systems within our consciousness. And what he stressed was this: if you think you understand this, you don't understand this. So it's like Richard Feynman said about quantum physics. If you think you understand quantum physics, you don't understand quantum physics. Mindfulness changes the way we relate to our thoughts and feelings. We don't have a measure. This is what he was saying 10 years ago. We don't have a measure that comes close to capturing the complexity of this idea, relating to thoughts and feelings. It's 10 years later, I want to take a stab at this without creating yet another global self-report questionnaire that would ask a convoluted question. Do you have a healthy relationship with your thoughts on a daily basis on a scale of 1 to 7? Which would be really bizarre. That's what the typical strategy is in psychology. So I want to focus on the degree to which we clarify and describe our emotions and whether that makes a difference in terms of resilience to drinking alcohol to cope with negative emotions. When we think about emotions, mostly we fall into two different dimensions that the focus is on. It's mostly valence. Psychology's been focusing on negative emotions, and here comes positive psychology. Now we're focusing on positive emotions. So that's our valence dimension. Completely ignored, Paul Wong has actually talked about this a number of times. I'm just going to say his name over and over again because he invited me here. This is my sign of gratitude. Maybe he didn't even say it. I'm going to give him credit for things that everybody said. The idea that most of the time we're ignoring the energy dimension of emotions, which is we focus on high energy emotions, and we ignore these low energy emotions: calmness, serenity, boredom. Paul Wong published a paper in the 70s about boredom and frustration with boredom. Paul Wong. So I wanted to go beyond valence and arousal and energy and have another dimension, which is, again, how we clarify and describe our felt experiences. That people differ in this ability. Some people have great precision in describing what they're feeling. As Charles was mentioning, I have twin 3-year-old girls. Because I'm a psychologist, I have to do weird experiments on them when I take them to places. So when they were 2 years old, there's a county fair where you can hook them up to like this S&M harness, and it's over a trampoline. And basically, what someone does is once they're in the S&M harness, you throw them against the trampoline and they fly into the air and they keep bouncing back and forth. Now, you're supposed to be 5 years old to enter this. I gave the guy $20 so that I can have my 2-year-old to see how they respond differently to this bizarre little fair experiment. And so when they got off this bizarre ride, Chloe freaked out immensely, and I asked her afterwards. I'm like, were you scared? And she said, I was scared and tired. And then Raven, which is like a little version of me, loved this thing. She's 2 years old. She's flying around. She's trying to figure out how to do flips. She's clearly gonna be riding motorcycles. She should have her first tattoo by the age of 5. And I asked her how she's feeling. She said it was good. Even at 2 years old, you see that Chloe is able to use great precision. I even set it up in advance of saying, did you feel scared? And she added another discrete emotion that you felt, which doesn't fit with the experience. Did you feel scared? Yes, and tired. And some people have great precision to be able to clarify the very distinct emotions that they're feeling at any given point in time. I feel angry and sad, a little bit of anxiety, but not much guilt. And other people say, I feel really shitty. And they're not able to, that's it. It's either good or bad, real crude in describing their emotions. Maybe this matters. Because our awareness of discrete emotions allows us access to what are the antecedents to what we're feeling, what behavioral responses are our emotions pushing us towards. So we know from one of my colleagues at George Mason University, June Tagney, that guilt, although a quote-unquote negative emotion, is actually a positive emotion. Is that you feel negative, but it promotes pro-social behavior. It motivates you. It pushes you towards wanting to, I should be modifying my behavior because it's having an adverse impact on other people. If I feel shame, that's an unhealthy emotion because I feel negative, but it's because I feel like I'm damaged and dirty as a person. It's hard to work with. Now, what if you couldn't distinguish whether you feel shame or guilt because you were found that you were caught cheating at something at work? Being able to distinguish which discrete emotion you're feeling provides access to the behavioral responses that you're being pushed towards, and whether we should be maintaining a situation or we should be altering a situation. So let me give you a concrete example of this besides my kids, because they will pop up serendipitously throughout this entire talk. This is in the New York Times after 9/11. These are 2 different responses after being interviewed. My first reaction was terrible sadness, but the second reaction was that of anger, because you can't do anything with the sadness. Right? You're seeing this very great precision, this temporal sequence of the emotions they're feeling. Pretty intense stuff. I felt a bunch of things I couldn't put my finger on. Maybe anger, confusion, fear. I just felt really bad on September 11th. Really bad. So what you're seeing is some differences here. Now this is in a singular moment, and a pretty intense one at that. But one with great differentiation, and one with great crudeness in terms of describing what they're feeling. Now let me just have a brief 30-second reprieve so I can talk about how measurement sucks in our field. This has been you've heard of the Alex Thymia research? Don't raise your hand if you're an Alex Thymia researcher, because I'm going to attack the research to no end. I'm going to put it to death right now. For 20 years, this is how we've been studying clarifying and describing emotions. You've got about 50 of these questions. Now it's down to 20, so now it's good, right? Where you get a question like this. In general, over the course of your life, answer these questions on a scale of 1 to 5, how much they relate to you. I'm often confused about what emotion I'm feeling. How the hell do you answer that question? How do you aggregate across your lifetime, across your emotional experiences, to the degree to which you get confused about what you're feeling? We wouldn't measure intelligence this way. of how intelligent are you on a scale of 1 to 5. We wouldn't do it with creativity. How creative are you on a scale of 1 to 5? We do have crappy measures out there on emotional intelligence that attempt to do this. They get widely cited. It's a great way to get cited because people love this, these self-report scales. I tend to be really good at discerning the emotions of other people on a scale of 1 to 5 over the course of my lifetime. But this is not, we're talking about abilities and skills. And if you want to measure something right, you have to, if you want to study something, you have to measure it appropriately. You can't say you're measuring someone's obesity by asking them on a questionnaire. You measure their body mass index. In psychology, we let ourselves get away with this really crude, crappy devices. If we want to measure how someone clarifies and describes their emotions in the moment, let's observe their behavior over the course of time and not have them answer a one-item question. And this is what we did. So we wanted to apply it in our first study to alcohol use, because I've always thought these conceptual models of disorders or well-being are far too simplistic. I mean, the fact that I even have to explain the tension reduction model of alcohol use. You feel negative emotions, alcohol is a really good way of coping, you drink, you feel less negative emotions. And then that's been around since the 60s, and then there's been a couple of add-ons, this really profound model to capture the complexity of how people drink, which is that we all differ in the degree to which we believe that drinking is an effective way of coping with negative emotions. And that's where we are really in terms of negative emotions and alcohol use in terms of our conceptual complexity. And if anyone here, and I know because I saw the pamphlets outside this ballroom, works with people with alcohol problems, had an alcohol problem, feel free to raise your hand, or is interested in substance abuse problems, the fact is it's not that simplistic in the real world. What we thought was that if people are able to clarify precisely what negative emotions they're feeling, even if they're extremely intense, they may be less likely to be overwhelmed and less likely to resort to maladaptive regulatory strategies such as excessive drinking. And this would be most relevant under times of stress, is that the degree to which you can precisely describe negative emotions might not be that important if you're not having intense negative emotions in the first place that you're trying to work with. So what we did was, and human subject review boards love these studies, underage social drinkers, parents love signing off on these studies, and we followed them up for 3 weeks. They carried on electronic diaries, and we followed them up to see what they're actually drinking. We randomly prompted them, beeped them throughout the day, and asked them, what are you doing? What are you feeling? And they answered a bunch of questions about their emotions throughout the day. This is over 3 consecutive weeks. This is a really rich data. They were asked, when they're randomly beeped throughout the day, up to 8 times a day. How tired did you feel? How sad? How anxious? How embarrassed? And from that, this rich data, we looked at it across 8 times a day, 3 weeks. Each person, we could calculate the degree to which people have all of their responses about negative emotions tend to cohere together, which is that if you're asked, how are you feeling in a given moment? Some people are going to say, I'm high on everything, or things are awesome, I'm low on everything. And some people are very precise in describing in detail what they're feeling. And they were asked to complete this electronic diary interview, self-initiated, right before they went out drinking, and then afterwards, because data are awesome. Once you take LSD and mescaline, peyote, and then suck down 5 drinks of alcohol, that the data that you get on these electronic diaries is fantastic, really reliable. So that was our strategy, because we thought that just seems really methodologically sound and sophisticated. So here's this is a new construct of trying to capture how you clarify and describe emotions by seeing what actually happens in the real world. Now, what you would expect is there should be a strong correlation among these specific emotions because they're all negative. So it's 0.59. But what I want to make an important point is there's a massive degree of variability between people. Some people, it's 0.21, which means that the degree to which you feel angry has almost no relationship with the degree to which you feel anxious. And other people are 0.85, which means they all go together, feeling really good or feeling really bad. Now, importantly, is maybe it's just the fact that the people that have the most intense negative emotions are the ones that have a harder time clarifying their emotions. Well, there's only a 0.22 correlation between intensity and the ability to clarify, describe, and understand your emotions. But again, these are the boring findings. Here comes the real cool stuff. What we found was that looking at a timeline follow back over the past 30 days, they were given a calendar, write down all the events that happened, so you can clearly contextualize when did you consume alcohol and how much over the course of the past month. I've got some other papers showing this is extremely highly correlated if you actually monitor people over the course of their daily lives. And what you find is that those people with the most intense negative emotions in their daily lives over the past 3 weeks has almost no predictive power as a main effect in predicting how much alcohol they consume. It's completely contingent on the degree to which they clarify and are able to describe what they feel. There's a 50% difference. These are all people with intense negative emotions regularly in daily life. If you have a difficulty of clarifying your emotions, you consume over 80 drinks over a 30-day period. If you're extremely good at clarifying precisely what you're feeling, you're consuming less than 50. That's a 50% difference. That's meaningful stuff. Now, we also thought, okay, but this is still a little bit retrospective. We asked them over the past 30 days. What about over the course of the 3 weeks that they're actually studying them? In the moment. So in the moment, right before you're about to go to a party, walk into a bar, go into your car and drink some whiskey before you go drive home. What are you feeling? Those people with the most intense negative emotions right before they drank, if they're able to clearly clarify and precisely describe what they feel in daily life, they consume substantially less alcohol than other people with intense negative emotions. The difference between 5.5 versus 3.5 drinks every single episode on average. So you're talking about, again, 40 to 50% reduction in alcohol consumed despite feeling this intense sorrow, this intense anger, this intense anxiety right before you're about to go drinking. 50% difference in alcohol consumption of people who are having intense negative emotions. So we want to replicate this because when you find these really bizarre synergistic effects, a lot of times it's just ends up being your data set. So we did another study, 186 students. For 3 weeks, we measured them on a daily basis, how much alcohol they consumed. Every day we asked them what emotions they're feeling. Once again, we found that you find that negative emotions tend to correlate together, but there's a extreme variability. Look at this. For some people, there's a negative 0.3 relationship between how anxious, how sad, how embarrassed, how shameful you feel on a given day. And for other people, it's 0.86. They're all just going together. They're not differentiating their emotions. No relationship with the intensity of emotions in daily life. And you find the exact same finding, is that for those people with the most intense negative emotions in their daily lives, if you're able to clarify and describe how you feel precisely on a daily basis, look at the alcohol consumption difference between those people that also have intense negative emotions. You're seeing this resilience factor. You're talking about a subset of mindfulness. Instead of this really globular term of mindfulness, breaking it down into the making meaning out of your emotions, being able to clarify what it is you're feeling. So then we thought to ourselves, there's no reason this should be limited to alcohol use. Maybe this is a transdiagnostic concept that's relevant to all sorts of maladaptive strategies to try to deal with difficulties and stress in daily life. Maybe when you get your feelings hurt, we have this reflexive response to want to aggress towards them. You're a perpetrator. You invaded my space. You hurt my feelings. I want to attack you. It's a strategy. But maybe if we're able to clarify and precisely describe what you feel, you're more able to have this little bit of breathing room, psychological space, that you don't have this reflexive response to regress. 150 college students for 3 weeks. For 3 weeks, each day they were asked, and this is intensive training they get before they go out in the world and monitor what it is that they're experiencing on a daily basis. We asked them, every day, were your feelings hurt by somebody? Yes or no? And we clarify what it was. It could be someone ignored you, someone was ungrateful to you, or it could be someone told you you're an asshole. It could be or someone actually just punched you in a bar. It could be, from what seemingly is small and insignificant to actual physical violence. Because you want to capture, it's all in the eye of the beholder. For some people who lose their goldfish, it's the same thing in terms of emotional pain as someone who loses their grandparent. We don't want to determine that for people. We want to actually measure everything. If they believe their feelings were hurt, that's what's important to us. So what we hypothesized was similar to the alcohol study, that maybe it's most relevant under times of stress. Maybe it's not just about your feelings getting hurt, but when your feelings are hurt, the more intense hurt you feel, those people that can precisely describe their feelings are less likely to aggress. But if your feelings are hurt and you don't feel that hurtful about it, probably doesn't matter too much. This is what we find. So the people that experience the most anger in response to feeling hurt, that doesn't tell us that much. They aggress a little bit more than people with less anger. But the difference is 50% on a daily basis. Every time your feelings are hurt, there's a 50% difference in the amount of aggression towards the perpetrator as a function of the degree to which you can precisely describe what you feel. So just to bring this home, is that emotions aren't passive. We make meaning out of felt experiences. We can measure this, but we need to have the methods have to match the question. If we want to see the skill and how people make meaning, we have to see it in action over the course of time. Because I don't know how any of us will be able to answer these questions in a questionnaire. How we identify and describe emotions, this is a distinct construct from the intensity and frequency of negative emotions, and appears to be transdiagnostic. Right now we're studying it in terms of eating behaviors and obesity. We're looking at other areas where this might be relevant. There's substantial variability in how negative emotions are related to aggression and alcohol use. So we have to figure out, can we map with theory that complexity to capture when is it most relevant that someone would do something maladaptive and unhealthy in their lives as they're navigating their social world. And really importantly, this is something we'll hit on tomorrow in the Future of Positive Psychology panel, is that main effects, simple variables, are not sufficient for understanding risk and resilience, because no construct exists in a vacuum. You've got hope researchers, forgiveness researchers, emotion researchers. Everybody's got their favorite construct. I wrote a whole book about curiosity. I'm no different than. But the fact is that when we study these one things and find correlation, it doesn't mean everything else doesn't exist. It just means that we didn't study them and we're missing all this complexity. But forget that. It's boring. That was boring. That was more boring than the first one. Let's go to a completely different study. Is purpose in life, because we're a meaning conference, so we should be talking about this thing. Everybody's talking about jobs, careers, and callings. These are our calling constructs that we must say if we're a meaning researcher. At some point in every day, we must say job, career, calling. So what I was interested in was purpose in life as an intervention to treat social anxiety disorder. We've got some efficacious interventions. Social anxiety disorder is one of my favorite ones for two reasons. One is we know that the only thing that distinguishes between happy people and people that are so freaking happy that pigeons can shit on their heads and they'll still be smiling is the quality of their social relationships. So the interesting thing about social anxiety disorder is their chronic fear about being evaluated and rejected gets in the way of them being able to obtain this fundamental source of meaning in life, this fundamental source of well-being. It's a fascinating disorder. The other thing about it is that when you treat it, you can see it right away. And it's a powerful thing, and you really change someone's life trajectory. So I have a real fondness for social anxiety disorder. This is my pet disorder. So if you look at our interventions and you talk to people that they actually are doing clinical trials, they'll tell you we have done amazing things, that 50% of clients, 40 to 50% of clients at the end of treatment are now, they look like people that don't have social anxiety disorder. And what I would argue is that's not that impressive. I mean, 50% of people who go into treatment are still suffering from these conditions. That doesn't count the people that drop out. That doesn't count the people that as soon as you told them you're going to be doing exposure therapy, they're thinking about 60 minutes where they have to do exposés, where they throw spiders on somebody who has a spider phobia and say, there's no way I'm going to let you send me to a party. And they drop out. So actually that 40, 50%, when you think about all the people that potentially were treated, drops down to about 30%. So when I think about positive psychology, and whatever this meaning thing is that we're doing here these couple days, is there are these backdoor routes that are more energizing, more replenishing to maybe treat these disorders. And purpose in life might be where the action is. But who knows? This is only my first study. And it's unpublished, so it might be all garbage. Who knows? Are some of you familiar with acceptance and commitment therapy? So one of the things, I'm not going to go into the details, but basically you're dealing with trying to undermine some of these avoidance processes. The idea of that people are trying to avoid unwanted thoughts and feelings and bodily sensations. People fuse with their thoughts often, such that if I have the thought, if I want to write a novel and I have self-doubt, that I interpret that as a literal representation of reality. That self-doubt clearly indicates I don't have the capability to write this book. And so we help people diffuse from this avoidance process. Now there's this other side of enhancing approach processes. We're going to clarify people's values. Some of you probably went to the pre-workshop about clarifying people's strengths. And then we're going to build goals that are aligned with those values. And then every day trying to get people to commit to behaviors so they can make everyday effort to make progress towards those goals that are aligned with people's values. Right? That makes sense? Did I say that too quick? Because I'm from New York City and I talk quick. Back of the room? Yeah? Okay. All right. You guys are the ones in the back of the bus that rip the backs of the seat out and throw a sponge at people. So here's the interesting thing. We've got acceptance commitment therapy. We've got this massive treatment module. There's been about 35 clinical trials about this. I just went to their annual convention in Reno a couple months ago. But there's almost no data to support this arm of acceptance commitment therapy. And so I've been really interested in actually developing the science to support this because I am a scientist. So we wrote a paper that nobody will ever read because it's in the Review of General Psychology about purpose in life. And basically the notion that why it's different from happiness is that happiness does not provide a compass of how do I guide and work myself through the complexities of everyday life. There's no guide there. It's inside. This is my thoughts and my feelings. In terms of your clarifying your values or your sustainable source of meaning in life, this is like a compass to a navigator. It helps you recognize, do I stay at work for an extra 10 hours to finish this project and miss my children's bedtime and miss the ritual of reading to them? Or do I go home and maybe when they go to sleep, I'll go back and I'll work at home? My values, my purpose, my source of meaning helps guide me through these complex, multiple decisions, these conflicts of multiple choice of what I can do with my time and energy. Happiness doesn't do anything like that. So it provides a guiding force between competing demands for our time and energy and about how do we actually apply our limited regulatory resources. So there's nothing to complete. There's no terminal endpoint for purpose in life. If your purpose in life is to be a good parent, there's no endpoint. My kids are 3, so I'm just in the beginning. So I don't feel like there's any end of there's not even hope, much less an endpoint. But there's no terminal endpoint. For the rest of your lives, you'll be making decisions of, do I help my child and actually help them purchase their first house or not? Does that actually help them become a better person? Or does it actually lead them to be more dependent on me? So sometimes you have to make decisions that will detract from happiness, but will make progress towards your purpose in life. There are sometimes very difficult decisions that we have to make about these things. In terms of the careers that we've all chosen, we're constantly making decisions where our happiness is detracted, but meaning goes through the roof. I always use Martin Luther King as an example of it because you don't see pictures of Martin Luther King throwing kids in the air and then tickling their belly buttons and have these massive Duchenne smiles. You see a really somber, like you guys in this crowd right now, of existential angst. This really somber crowd, somber experiences when you talk about Martin Luther King. Very serious, really strongly invested in this purpose of making sure that the disenfranchised are going to get a voice. It's not about happiness. It's about meaning is his guiding influence. Gandhi the same way. You don't see him. You don't see him running, skinny dipping in the waters. The waters in India. You don't see him having sex romps. You don't see him sort of staying up to 3 o'clock in the morning smoking cigars. He's focused on a very somber track of meaning in life. It's a guiding influence of what to do. So here was the basic question that led me to this line of research was, even if you have social anxiety disorder, significant distress or impairment, you got to have some good days. And so I wanted to figure out, naturally, before we actually do these comprehensive multi-million-dollar trials that's going to be funded by the government, I want to see on a daily basis what's going to predict a really good day for someone with social anxiety disorder. And so this is the first study that I know of that's ever studied commitment to a purpose in life and how this actually unfolds in the context of someone's life. And the question was, does daily effort and progress towards a purpose in life actually lead to the amelioration of distress and the enhancement of well-being? And again, remember, these are all clients with social anxiety disorder. Actually, we have a comparison group of healthy people in the community as well. So 84 people, 42 people with the diagnosis of social anxiety disorder. We use all of the the gold standards for semi-structured clinical interviews. The control sample was matched for gender, age, ethnicity, and race. Why they're separate, I don't know. Religion, marital status. So we've got a very nice kind of weird matching process going on here. What we did is for 2 weeks, some really intensive experience sampling. Every day they carried around electronic diaries, reporting about their emotions, their self-esteem, all sorts of well-being variables. And before that happened, we had them actually report on the personal striving assessment. Open-ended. What are you trying to accomplish in your life? What's your life organized around? Same thing as in study 1. And then afterward, we asked them to go back to their list. Is there anything on that list, up to 2, that you would describe as a central, fundamental, life-organizing principle? Not in those words, but that's because we're in a scientific conference, I have to sound intelligent. Purpose. Is there a purpose in life there? Are there certain strivings that are like a bullseye that centrally define who you are as a person and what you're trying to do with your life? If so, what we did was we wrote it down on an index card, not an index card, on a business card. They carried around with them for the 3 weeks, or 2 weeks, the 2 weeks they were in the study. And each day, they were reporting on their effort and progress towards those 2 purposes in life, or maybe it's purposes in life. And so what we wanted to see was what co-varies with that effort and progress towards purpose on a daily basis. What we looked at was 3 different outcomes. Self-esteem, I mentioned before why that's useful. Meaning in life, what you would suspect, but again, it's never really been tested, is that commitment to a purpose in life, you would extract more meaning on days that you made progress towards your purpose in life. But no one's actually ever studied this contextualized. People have shown that measures of purpose in life are correlated with measures of meaning in life, but again, it's a horrible methodology. My apologies for all of us that have done that research. And the other one is about positive emotions, because positive psychology loves positive emotions. That's the rationale. We will write that in the paper. And so what we found was that so that's the control group. Obviously, they're having more self-esteem on a daily basis. And the control group has more meaning in life on a daily basis compared to people with social anxiety disorder. And they've got more positive emotions. But here's the kicker. Small progress towards their purpose in life versus large progress towards their purpose in life. These are people with social anxiety disorder. 30% bump every single day on average in self-esteem, meaning in life, and positive emotions. Now, they have no idea what this study is about. It's an electronic diary, so they can't see what their answers are on a daily basis. You have this naturalistic intervention. Even though they have this disorder, independent from that, their life's about something. And some of those things are central to them, which we could define as a purpose in life. It organizes what to do with their time, what to do with their energy, what to do with competing demands of what to do with their time. 30% difference, such that when we look at self-esteem, there is no significant difference between people with social anxiety disorder on a daily basis who make significant progress towards their purpose in life and people without the disorder. Now that's impressive stuff, considering that deficient self-esteem is almost a defining feature of social anxiety disorder. Now, if we were to ask them, in your life, how's your self-esteem? They would say it's really low. What we're seeing is it depends on how much progress you're making on your purpose. So we thought, well, what about if we just looked at making effort? I am devoting time and energy towards it. We find the exact same findings. Whether it's effort towards your purpose in life or progress, you're seeing this naturalistic intervention. So here are the 3 lessons about the meaningful life. One is that emotion regulation, trying to be happy, can be problematic when it's the fundamental self-organizing principle of a person's life. Trying to be happy in a moment, in a week, having it as one of your strivings, that's fine. But when it is what your life is about, you are missing what's right in front of you. You are not actually living your life. You are battling and working with things inside your brain. If we were pulling an Emerson or Thoreau fake experience to be one of nature, that kind of thing might be useful in terms of having this internal contemplative experiences. In moments, that's perfectly fine. But when we move up a notch to say our life is organized around trying to be happy, it's problematic. The other lesson, that the influence of emotion extends beyond valence and arousal to how we relate, describe, and make meaning out of the emotions we experience. And this has the potential to actually attenuate the impact of negative emotions in our daily life, even when they're really intense. And when we're crude at describing our emotions, we're not able to extract the meaning that they offer us about what's pushing us towards, what are the antecedents, what's my life about, why am I having these emotions? We can't extract that information. We can't squeeze that juice out if we can't clarify precisely what we're feeling. And finally, is that this whole obsession with happiness is off, I think, in positive psychology. Is that if you want to have sustainable well-being, commitment to a purpose in life, it provides the architecture of a well-lived life. And I think that some of the researchers have it off because of the fact, and again, great intentions, great motivation, but you know what? Meaning and purpose in life, Daniel and I were talking about this yesterday, does not get the attention it does in the field. Happiness is easier. You've got a smiley face. You've got an icon. There's no icon for meaning in life. What even a nihilist, like holding, writing poetry in the back of a diner there's no facial expression lined up with meaning in life. It's hard to come up with concrete examples of what meaning in life looks like in the workplace compared to happiness. It's hard to write, a lot of you have written books about meaning in life. It's a lot easier to write a book about happiness. Smiley people, happy workers, people hugging, throwing kids in the air, playing ball, playing with Play-Doh. Meaning in life is a much more complex cognitive endeavor. But just because it's difficult doesn't mean we shouldn't be studying it. In fact, that's exactly why we should be studying it. It's complex, it's important, it's difficult. So for me, that's freaking fun because we have uncharted territory, even though it's decades after Viktor Frankl. We are still in uncharted territory in terms of empirically studying meaning in life. No disrespect to Viktor Frankl. Fantastic theorist, amazing books. One of the reasons why I study meaning in life. Horrible empirical science. Not his fault. The methodologies weren't there at the time. We now have methodologies that are very sophisticated to capture the dynamic, flexible nature of how people operate in their daily lives. And we can do things with these rich theories that too many young people forget. In terms of take these rich theories and quantify it. Extract constructs, extract ideas, and actually study them to see what actually works the best. So I've got a lot of collaborators. Michael Steger, you just missed. I'm sorry. None of our studies were on here. I didn't have another bullet point to say other people. So lots of collaborators. I've been fortunate to get a lot of funding for this. We actually have a grant right now. I just submitted last week to the Department of Homeland Security to study the development of meaning and purpose in life in firefighters all over the country and first responders. So hopefully I'll be studying that in the near future. And buy my book outside and I'll sign it. I get 1 cent or 2 cents per copy.